So, Ryan, we'll start out with this one. Of course, much talked about in regards to this first matchup going down to the second final play, a 1-point game. Jordan Birch is the most obvious addition from a health standpoint for this Oregon team. But when you look at his addition, what that means, and then anything else that you see different out of this Oregon team a couple months later.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. Welcome, gentlemen. Good to see you guys. Yep. The addition to Birch, I think, is going to be a big deal because it's going to be about the quarterback play and who can push what guy off his spot, right? I think the big thing for Ohio State in this last game against Oregon was, they didn't put that much pressure on Dylan Gabriel. They actually did put pressure on him, but he was just able to get the ball out quick enough with his hands. The guy's very savvy quarterback, or they were able to pick up blocks here and there. They're going to have to put a lot of pressure on this Oregon offense because the Oregon offense can score when you go down the schedule. There's not a lot of great offenses that the Buckeyes had to face like Oregon was this year. Oregon proved it in the game against Ohio State, just answering each bell for the most part. I think for Oregon, though, it's going to be about trying to just hang with those receivers, right? I think if Oregon can make Ohio State a little one-dimensional by trying to stop their run and putting everything in front of those receivers and making them be the star of the show, that might be all right, but they're still going to burn you. I mean, in the last game against the Ducks, they both had great days, almost 100 yards each of them. So it's going to be a tough situation. I think it's going to go right down to the wire again, and it's going to be an instant classic, man. I can't wait to go.
I had a question about the Penn State game, because we've talked about that performance. We for our podcast, we watched the Wisconsin game, the Washington game, and the Penn State game, and wild variations in all three of those games. And some of the feedback that we got was there's a flu outbreak prior to the Big Ten championship game, and that was part of the reason the defense struggled so much against the run. Can you speak to that? And then also, are there concerns stopping the run? Because the defensive line that we saw against Washington was not the same defensive line we saw against Penn State. They dominated Washington, and they were absent against Penn State.
Yeah, I think two things there. I think the flu thing, I think, is there was something going on with some of the guys who I've talked to right after the game didn't have any problem with it or didn't say anything about it. But at the end of the year, teams are going to be sick. Teams are going to be banged up, flying around. Things like that happen. Again, I can't really speak on the injury front, but I can say that Penn State was a team that took the first couple shots from Oregon, looked like it was going to be a blowout. And then all of a sudden they just regrouped, went back to what they do best, which is control the clock, run the ball, go to the tight end. And they did a pretty good job in the next 3 quarters, basically, of playing their brand of football. And I'm a offensive line guy. That's how I kind of see through the lens, is through the offense and defensive line, through the defensive ends. And, I thought they did a really good job maintaining Oregon's pressure. And I thought Drew Aller did a good job of moving the offense up and down the field without really seeing that much from those guys that we had seen before. I mean, the guys came off of a banner day against Washington, like you said. Wisconsin, they couldn't really get much pressure on the guys. With Washington, they completely went bonkers. And then against Penn State, I just felt like it was a much better offensive line. And then the other thing about Penn State is that they never gave up on their thing, right? They kept running the ball, which then opened up some passes a little bit. And I think that's the big thing is that if you can just stay true to your game, when you go up against these teams, I think the better team is going to dictate the terms over time. And it felt like at the end of that Penn State game that Penn State was playing like the better team. Oregon's offense was keeping them in the game, but Penn State played a hell of a game that game. It really surprised me. I was very impressed with that team by the end of it. And in the first quarter, I was like, oh, here we go again. And by the end of it, I was like, oh, no, this is a team that's legit, and they could actually make a pretty good run in this playoff.
I wonder if there's just a little bit of a let up from Oregon, because it seemed like the game was over. And then
it did feel like that. It did feel like that. And then also from our perspective, I know the players wouldn't say this, but from our fan base perspective, we thought we were going to play you guys. So we were really pumped up about a possibility of a rematch in the championship. And when the Buckeyes lost to the team up north, we were disappointed as well, because there was a lot of I can't speak for all the Duck fans, but I know a lot of Duck fans were wanting the best of the best to get rematched again, and then possibly see each other again in the 12-teamer.
I will I will throw out a question about the receiving group. It felt like maybe they were a little banged up the first time Ohio State played Oregon. And obviously, Trayshawn Holden got thrown out of the game for spitting on Davis and Igbinosun. Where is that group right now? Are they all back fully healthy? And, it looks like, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, at least 9 different guys caught touchdown passes this year. Looks like they've got, as we saw it, a lot of different people that can make plays for that offense out wide. Just what is the state of the receiver core? Because I think, Gabriel is only going to be as good as his receivers are ultimately in the matchup with the Ohio State secondary.
Yeah, I totally agree. Tez Johnson's the number one guy just because what he does is so unique. I think he's just so fast. He's got a very good knack for the ball and for being able to catch the ball and still be able to have contact. And as small as he is, I heard a great one. Brian Baldinger, he said that this guy is so small he needs to jump around in the shower to get wet. I thought that was a classic Baldy line. But yeah, no, the Trayshawn Holden going out of that game was a big deal. He's a big body receiver. He's a short yardage receiver. He's the guy who can take a short yardage gain across the middle, especially on a slant, and take it for, 10 to 15 more yards, or even take it to the house. The Gary Bryant Jr. was a guy who was out during that game. But Evan Stewart, I thought, was really amazing in that game. I think the surprising thing for us when it came to the Ohio State game, and I was at that game at Autzen. I don't miss any game at Autzen. This was the biggest game in Autzen Stadium history. I've said it over and over on my channel that this is the number one thing of all time because of Ohio State. Oregon plays there every other week. It was the Ohio State that brought that level of importance to that game against the Ducks there at Autzen. And so to think in terms of, what was the difference in that game? What was the separator? It was, I think, Oregon's ability to go over the top. I think that was a thing that people were not really expecting. I saw numerous comments about Denzel Burke, just yesterday or today when they were talking in the press conference about trying to hype him up, or that was a point of contention or whatever the case may be. He wasn't the only one in the Big Ten that got burned by. The Oregon Ducks went over the top on just about everybody. And the only team that really they didn't have success was against Wisconsin and for whatever reason. And I felt like even with Wisconsin, it felt like they just fell into the Wisconsin trap of trying to play their game and trying to beat them their way, which is, running the ball and whatever the case may be, just not trying to be that explosive with the offense. Oregon's offensive game plan against Ohio State was very, very risky and very explosive in my mind, but there was a risk reward that they won on. The ball over the top to Tez, the ball over the top to Evan Stewart early. That's number 7, number 15. I mean, those guys just played a great game. I think Evan Stewart had almost 150 yards receiving that game, right? So yeah, I mean, that was unexpected from a Duck fan. We knew that Oregon could go out there and run the ball pretty much against anybody. They knew that Ohio State had the best defense, had one of the best fronts, but it was about, could they go over the top on that great defense? We knew that Caleb Downs had just entered the chat with you guys, who I thought was the best player in college football defensively before he even got to your guys' team. And then it feels like he makes your team that much better. But it really was the surprise to me in that first game was Oregon's ability to throw the ball and Oregon's ability to keep their quarterback upright and not have any pressure from Jack Sawyer and JTT. Those were the two guys that I felt like they could be the most disruptive, and it turns out that they really weren't. That's kudos to Oregon's offensive line, but I think that's also goes to show you kind of what the game plan was then. It was fairly vanilla defensively for Ohio State the first time.
If I could slide in real quick, just because you mentioned to Evan Stewart, and he had the huge game against Ohio State, 7 for 149 and a touchdown, and he was obviously much heralded coming into college football as a 5-star and had nice seasons at Texas A&M. So we expected him to be an impact player. But other than that game, he's had maybe one other good game, and otherwise he's been pretty non-existent.
Yeah. And I think that part of the reason why they went to him the way they did in that Ohio State game was because Ohio State was doing such a good job covering everybody else. Again, I think that sometimes it benefits you to be the number 2 or number 3 receiver. And even the way that Oregon utilizes the tight end, I would say the tight end is almost the number 2 receiver, in priority list of going down the line. So I'm a big believer that the 2 or 3 spot can get you really paid if you do it the right way, if you're in one of these really good offenses with a great wide receiver room. And we knew going into this year that this was going to be a big difference from Oregon historically. Oregon historically has always had good offenses, but they've rarely had a really elite wide receiver room and a really elite deep wide receiver room. Might have 1 or 2, but rarely do you have multiple guys there that you can exploit that are all really good players. And now they do.
I think part of the problem for Ohio State that first game was the fact that Oregon wasn't going over the top successfully before that game. I think there was a stat at one point that Dylan Gabriel hadn't even attempted a pass to the right down 20 yards downfield or more. And then right away in that game, that's what they were doing. They were going against tendencies and throwing deep. And I think a lot of times you'll see like Denzel Burke basically just stopping at the sticks, expecting that's where the throw is going to be. And I think the game plan was a lot about stopping them at the sticks, but Oregon's receivers just kept going past the sticks, and Ohio State wasn't able to recover from that as well as they should have. So this time, it'll be a different game plan for both teams, and because nobody's going to do the same thing they did last time. And Ohio State, if they do the same thing they did last time, they're fools. But also now this kind of opens up everything else for Oregon's offense in terms of a lot of the short stuff that they probably wasn't available the first time might be available more. But you'll see a more aggressive Ohio State defense and a more aggressive blitzing attack. But really, like Dylan Gabriel is probably the most equipped guy to handle all of that because he's under control all the time. It's really remarkable just how calm he is when he shouldn't be calm, because I don't know how he sees anything, let alone how he sees everything.
That's a great point. Early in the season, the first 2 games that he was under pressure more than Bo Nix was in the previous 2 years. And, there were people who were saying, oh, God, it's the offensive line. It's this, that, and the other. What's the deal? And I actually thought, as a former offensive lineman, this quarterback is just too cool. He's just he nothing rattles him. I mean, the pocket's falling apart around him, and he's still in here. It's like Bo Nix would have been gone. Bo Nix avoided a lot of sacks with his feet, got the heck out of there. Whereas Dylan Gabriel's willing to kind of hang out there a little bit longer, and it feels like his clock is slower than everybody else's clock when it comes to the in play in between the snaps. And I just feel like he's a guy who has proven it every single step of the way. There were some question marks early on this year about, is he the right guy or whatnot? And everybody does this in every school that has these transfers because you don't know what the transfers. If they even said that about Bo Nix, they're like, oh God, here we go. And Bo Nix came out and was a great quarterback for 2 years. Dylan Gabriel's come in here and been a freaking great quarterback for the Ducks. So, he's a very cool, calm, collected guy, and I've chatted with him numerous times. And he's the exact same way when you talk with him. He wants to talk with everybody. He shakes the hands of the security guards and stuff on the way out of the building. He's just a very gracious guy, and he's a very humble guy for being as good as he is. But the guy can really spin it. He's a guy who he sees the field. He's like a classic point guard who's going to make passes that no one else on the court really sees. He sees it, and he passes guys open. He's just got a great touch on the ball. He can throw the ball deep. I don't know what his prospect is for the NFL, but he's a great college quarterback.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up about Gabriel and the misgivings of the fan base. After the Michigan game, we were still getting, when Howard threw 2 interceptions, we were still getting messages on the message board. I don't think Howard's the guy. And then he went out in very cold conditions last Saturday, 24 of 29 for 310 yards, 2 touchdowns. And he got victimized on that interception. It went off Jeremiah Smith's hands while he was being interfered with, and up in the air to Brooks, the player from Tennessee, who got a foot down in bounds back of the end zone for the interception. Otherwise, he has a clean sheet. So, and that would have made it 28-0 if they complete that pass. So Howard has finally redeemed himself, it seems, in the eyes of the Ohio State fans, 13 games in. And, certainly Gabriel being the runner-up in the Heisman Trophy balloting or was he number 3, I guess?
Yeah. Genty was the guy everybody thought should have got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I sorry to cut you off. I think Will Howard's fantastic. I mean, he looks like the prototype quarterback. You look up on the dictionary what a quarterback looks like, and he's the guy. So I'm glad that people are finally allowing him to be the starter. You know,
Well,
these are the situations that transfer. You never know what you're going to get, right? And sometimes it's not an automatic thing. He's been great all year. I mean, it had a couple of bad games. You got to tip the cap to Michigan a little bit. They played tough that game.
yeah. I think the thing about Howard that I'll say, and I know the fans that are Ohio State fans on the chat can weigh in as well. Howard, every time he's spoken to the media, it's very clear how much he cares and how much this means to him. And I think Ryan Day and Chip Kelly have both talked about not only has he been a good leader for the team in the locker room, but he has also been a good contributor behind the scenes in building the offense week in and week out, and sits in the game planning meetings, and he will tell them point blank, yes, I like this. No, I do not like that, based on what I've seen and what I know I can do. And so I think that that's been invaluable to them. The offense really only had one bad game all season. It just happened to come at the absolute wrong time. And I think it was a byproduct of Ohio State couldn't run the ball against Michigan, and he got dinged up. I mean, second quarter, he took a heavy hit. He was 6 of 8, I think, before the hit, and something like 13 of 25 afterward, and just not the same. So it was kind of a perfect storm of everything that happened that day. And believe me, in my 30-some years of doing this, I've seen a lot of perfect storms, and most of them not good for the home team. So yeah, it happens from time to time.
Yeah, well, I tend to think that that game, he's only going to play the calls that are called for him to run, right? And I feel like there was a lot of discussion about maybe that they were running a little bit too conservative of play calling, especially when they're down by the goal line, and we being former Chip associates as well, we've felt some of that as well. We felt some of the times where we got burned here with Chip doing this, running the same 2 or 3 plays over and over and over, and not having a great result, and people were not booing actively in the stadium like I heard during that game, but it was frustrating to see a team with that many weapons keep it in first gear. So hopefully it'll be a banger of a game on Wednesday.